Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. Today, written by Matthew Markham, thank you Matthew, the disappearance of Natalee Holloway, one family's 2-decade fight for justice. Okay, let's jump into it. The format of the show, if you're new here, Matthew's written me a script, I've never read it before, so let's just jump in. Is there anything more exciting than taking a vacation? I mean, yeah. I ask because I assume this episode will premiere sometime in the summer of 2024. First day of summer today, 1st of June, when many listeners will be packing their bag. 1st of June, 2nd of... Siri, what's the date today? Okay, Siri, just say nothing. That's fine. I'm not relying on you, Siri. Oh, I see it right here at the top of my iPad. 2nd of June. Second day of summer. No one cares. Let's get into it.
I'm baking like a toasted cheese here. It's so hot here.
When many listeners will be packing their bags to fly away to some distant country where good times and relaxation are all but guaranteed. Matthew's not traveling with children, is he? Oh, God, it's a different vibe when you got kids. It's like, yeah, okay. It's just all about the kids. It's fine. It's nice to spend time with my kids. Personally, I know I could use a vacation, but I won't be taking one because, unfortunately, I'm painfully aware of the dangers that accompany international travel. Yes, as I've been informed, beyond the US border lies a lawless world teeming with criminals and ne'er-do-wells, thieves looking to break into my hotel room and steal my luggage, fraudsters attempting to swindle me out of my hard-earned money, and extortionists foaming at the mouth to kidnap me and hold me for ransom. Steady on, Matthew. I live in the other parts of the world. And worst of all, if one of these tragedies does befall me, the governments of most foreign countries won't lift a finger to help me because they hate Americans and freedom and Jesus. Yes, I think I have more than enough motivation to keep my butt planted firmly in front of my keyboard, where it belongs. And for the benefit of this show as well, Matthew, keep on writing, keep on moving those fingers. Obviously, I'm being a bit facetious here, but there is no shortage of people in America, particularly rural America, who wholeheartedly subscribe to this mindset. My experience with them is firsthand, as many of the older people I grew up around repeatedly assured me that I would be killed, or worse, if I dared to leave the safety and security of Uncle Sam's burly embrace. Killed or worse.
Yeah, you go on holiday, you Matty boy. Well, you know, let's just say it's more likely than not that you're going to end up being tortured to death.
They, of course, have never left the country themselves and had no way of knowing what they were talking about, but they meant well, so I certainly can't fault them. Plus, it's no secret how they arrived at their misguided conclusion. Like sex, fear sells, and the 24-hour news networks figured out a long time ago that it's not difficult to manufacture fear, especially when it concerns traveling abroad. I feel that they mostly manufacture fear about like terrorist attacks and school shootings, which are all generally domestic issues, America. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, international missing persons cases were always big news and served as a starting pistol for a sensationalized news cycle that followed a very predictable pattern. Something tragic happens to an American tourist overseas, it becomes front-page news as networks seize the opportunity to hook viewers, audiences recall all the times this happened in the past, and panic sets in. Yeah, I mean, there is a certain, morbid curiosity about this stuff. Maybe not about the people missing or whatever, but there's literally a TV show in England called Banged Up Abroad, which is just about British people having to spend time in horrible foreign prisons in Thailand or something, where they're just sleeping in someone else's feces and eating rice that someone has already eaten out, this kind of situation. It's basically the summer version of poisoned Halloween candy in more ways than one. Hope you can understand how, if this warped reporting is your only source of information, the outside world could quickly become a very scary place. Today's case is just one of many that the media used for this purpose, yet the details of it are tragic nonetheless. It occurred in 2005 when a young woman from Alabama named Natalee Holloway disappeared from the island of Aruba while on vacation with her friends. Almost immediately, news stations began broadcasting images of Natalie around the clock, as it seemed that a picturesque face would be permanently etched into the corner of every LCD television screen in the country. As the story unfolded, US governors even began calling for a nationwide boycott of the island as allegations of incompetent policing and corruption by Aruban government officials and judges circulated. Thanks to the fact that both Natalie's parents, particularly her mother, and the alleged killer opted to give repeated news interviews. What? The alleged killer? It's at 10, Natalee Holloway's mother. At 10:30, her alleged killer. What the The story stayed in the public's consciousness for years as the FBI, the Aruban government, and multiple private investigative teams attempted to uncover real answers in a case that seemed hopeless. However, what nobody at the time knew was that it would take until late 2023, a full 18 years since Natalee's disappearance, for the complete, elusive truth to be finally revealed. Oh, well, that's nice. I mean, at least we're going to have a conclusion to today's episode rather than...
Hey, and it remained a mystery. Unsatisfying real-life ending.
I promise, I've never heard of this case, by the way. I'd have been aware of the news in 2005. I was 17? 18 in 2005. So, yeah, maybe this was just more of an American-focused thing. A promising future. Seeing as much of our story today will revolve around a mother's 2-decade search for her missing daughter, it's best to begin this chapter a bit earlier than we normally do by discussing briefly Beth Holloway. By Beth's own account, her early life was largely uneventful. She was born Elizabeth Reynolds in 1980 and raised in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where she was an excellent student who went on to pursue a bachelor's degree in speech pathology from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. While studying here, she met and began dating her future husband, Dave Holloway, and upon graduating, transferred to Arkansas State University to obtain her master's degree. With this finished, she and Dave then married and moved to the tiny town of Clinton, Alabama, where she found work as a special needs teacher. This is where and when her daughter, Natalie Holloway, was born on October the 21st, 1986. A few years later, Beth and Dave's second child, Matthew, was also born. Okay, so these kids are basically the same age as me. Natalie is a year older than me. According to those who knew the family, Dave and Beth's marriage started off fine. However, it was not meant to last. They divorced in 1993 when Natalie was 7 years old. From here, Beth then took primary custody of both children, choosing to raise them on her own. While living and working in Clinton, Beth then met a man with the most quintessential Alabama name that I've ever heard of, Jug Twitty. Really? Whose real name was George. When's Jug a short for George? Jug was a prominent and wealthy Alabama businessman who had children of his own from a previous marriage. He quickly fell in love with Beth and the pair married on July 26, 2000. They relocated to Mountain Brook, Alabama, a wealthy suburb of Birmingham. Fortunately, despite this messy time in the family's lives, Beth's divorce and new marriage did not seem to affect Natalie or Matthew in any negative way. While enrolled at Mountain Brook High School, Natalie's excellent grades earned her a spot in the National Honor Society, and she quickly found a home within multiple student groups, including the student government and the school's dance team. However, beyond her accomplishments on paper, Natalie was also a very popular person. She had many friends in Mountain Brook, ones who would someday attest to how nice, honest, and kind she was to everyone she met. She was also regarded by the school staff as a positive influence on those around her. I'm not saying that she wasn't all of these things, but if someone disappears in mysterious circumstances and you're being interviewed, you're like, nah, they were a bit of a knob, to be honest. It's like, you'd be honest, no, they were right. They always seemed to have a good disposition. Yes, they were fine. so, you know, you wouldn't be like, not that Natalie was any of these things. She does seem genuinely nice. She was also regarded by the school staff as a positive influence on those around her. As a student who excelled in Spanish language class and a member of the American Field Service, she volunteered her time to help foreign exchange students from Spanish-speaking countries adapt and feel more welcome in Alabama. In short, she was the type of daughter that any parent would be proud to have. Nobody could say a negative word about her. Appropriately, the colleges that Natalie applied to were eager to meet with her, and she was eventually accepted into the University of Alabama and offered a full scholarship. God damn! There she planned to pursue a career in healthcare and someday become a doctor. But first, she had some big plans to attend to. One of Natalie's biggest obsessions as a teenager was travel. With help of her parents' money, she had taken trips to Canada and Europe and had sailed aboard multiple international cruise ships. In her senior yearbook, she quoted lyrics from the song Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd. If I leave tomorrow, would you still remember me? For I must be traveling on now. There's too many places I haven't seen. As an adult, Natalie hoped to continue her travels between semesters at AU, but her first trip was scheduled to occur before her time in college even began. In 2005, directly after her senior year, she planned to see what the Dutch Caribbean island of Aruba, which is located approximately 18 miles north of the coast of Venezuela, was like. For the prior few years, seniors at Mountain Brook High School, along with a few volunteer chaperones from the school, had been organizing an unsanctioned trip for one last hurrah with their graduating peers. Not every senior student attended, but those that did came back with stories of fun times that mirrored any classic coming-of-age movie. It had become a regular tradition in their small community. The reason that Aruba Aruba was chosen was because of its approachability. It was a popular tourist destination, and at least 3 out of the 4 islands' visitors were from the United States, which meant that most residents of Aruba spoke English as a second language. Many local restaurants, shops, venues, nightclubs, and hotels also catered directly to American clients. There were familiar chains lining the streets and products stocking the shelves, making it a suitable destination for people who didn't want to be overwhelmed by total unfamiliarity. As it had in the past, the trip was scheduled to last 5 days. However, some in Natalie's family were hesitant to allow her to go. Her father said, quote, "I thought it was, in my opinion, too extravagant. And I said, no, we're not going to do this. And I flat out told her she was not going to Aruba if I had anything to do with it." However, for as much as Dave protested, he also knew that Natalie had grown into an exceptional young woman. So when she didn't stop hounding him about the trip, he relented. Wait, this was her original dad, not her stepdad, right? Her stepdad's the one with the money. So she'll be like, yeah, Dad, look, I'm going. It's happening, Dad. And also, she's 18 by this point. She can do what she wants. Beth had her qualms about the trip as well, primarily because one of Jug's sons, her stepson, had run into a bit of trouble while on the trip himself 2 years earlier. In 2003, while at a local bar called Carlos and Charlie's, according to Beth, my stepson had an encounter at Carlos and Charlie's. There were some locals there, and they had coaxed some young females into leaving the establishment with them, and he stepped in at the last minute because he just didn't feel good about the situation. This left Beth fearing that because Natalie was a young woman, she'd be targeted by all the local men. However, like David, she took comfort in the fact that Natalie was a smart girl and that there would be chaperones on standby in case, God forbid, something did go terribly wrong. Plus, being a part of a group of over 125, god damn, that's a hell of a trip. You're getting like half a plane. The phrase safety in numbers provided relief on the nights when worry began to creep in. Aruba. Natalie, 124 classmates, and 7 chaperones arrived in Aruba via airplane on May the 26th, 2005. It was Thursday, and they landed at the Queen Beatrix International Airport in Oranjestad, the island's capital. From here, they traveled south to Palm Beach and checked into the Holiday Inn Resort and Casino, where nearly an entire floor was reserved for them. From the watchful eyes of their parents, the graduates then spent the next few days making their way to and from various locations around the island. Because Aruba's legal drinking age was 18 instead of 21, most were having their first taste of legal alcohol. Many partook eagerly, and the next 4 days and nights on the island were truly unforgettable. Lorraine Watson, one of Natalie's classmates, stated, "We were so excited. I mean, it was a tropical paradise without our parents together." Claire Fearman, another classmate and close friend of Natalie's, confirmed, "We were on the beach. We stayed outside all day. You'd usually take a nap, get dressed, go eat dinner, and then go to one of the bars. Come home whenever you wanted to." Natalie herself reportedly had a similar positive experience for the first few days. However, that all changed on the last night of the trip, Sunday, May 29th, when she and several of her friends, including Lorraine Watson, ventured down to the Holiday Inn Resort's casino. That night, they intended to make good use of their final hours on the island, where any lost sleep could be made up for on the flight home. First, they ordered a drink and hit the blackjack table. This is when Natalie met a 19-year-old teen who introduced himself as Joran. According to Lorraine, Joran was very tall, about 6'4", confident and very friendly. He also looked like a normal guy around their age and could have easily passed as just another teenager from Alabama like them. Lorraine couldn't recall who approached who first, but Joran and Natalie began talking to one another at some point during the night. This is when he revealed to their small group that he was a student from the Netherlands on holiday with his own friends. After this, he accompanied Natalie and the rest of them when they left the casino, going to Carlos and Charlie's. Carlos and Charlie's was a popular spot for the American group every year, and over 100 of the students had packed into the tiny bar that night, essentially taking control of the establishment. It was crammed from wall to wall. At one point in the night, Lorraine spotted Natalie from across the bar talking with Joran, but did not personally speak with either of them. Lorraine thought Natalie appeared fine, and the conversation seemed amicable, so she didn't want to intrude. As the bar was about to close, at around 1 a.m., the DJ played Sweet Home Alabama as the last song of the night for the students, who all drunkenly shouted the familiar lyrics back at him in unison. After this, they all finished what remained of their drinks and set out into the night. Unfortunately, because so many of the teens had been eager to stay out until the last possible minute, the scene outside Carlos and Charlie's was chaotic. There were far too many passengers for the small number of taxis that were available at that time of night, so students were sitting on each other's laps in order to fit as many people inside each car as possible. Still, there were not enough, and Natalie could not catch a ride. Students present that night stated that Natalie was one of those without a ride, but she was later seen getting into a car with Joran and his friends, whom they'd never met before. They assumed that Joran was giving her a ride back to the hotel and did not attempt to intervene, as they were understandably too preoccupied with arranging a ride for themselves in the chaos. Also, this dude is also just on holiday there. He's the same age. He seems friendly with their friends. You wouldn't necessarily get any psycho vibes. You'd be just like, yeah, young people hanging out, having a good time. When Claire, Freeman, and the rest of them arrived back at the Holiday Inn Resort, she immediately fell asleep and did not awaken until it was time to leave the next morning. The class's time in Aruba had officially come to an end. Missing, Day 1. Standing in line at the airport and waiting to board her flight, Claire was more focused on the journey home than she was on anything else. She assumed that Natalie had made it back to the hotel the previous night. However, this belief was shattered when Frances Ellen, another of Natalie's friends, came rushing up to her. As Claire was boarding, Frances took Claire by the arm and said, "Natalie's not coming home. We can't find her." Frances told Claire that all of Natalie's belongings were still inside her room untouched, but nobody, including the chaperones, had been able to find her. Nobody had seen her since the previous night, since they were all outside the bar. All at once, Claire felt tension building in her chest as she attempted to recall whether or not she had seen Natalie at any point that morning. She eventually decided that she wasn't sure and wanted to go back to the hotel to aid in the search, but she couldn't. The plane was about to take off, and she would have no way of getting home if she wasn't on it. With a guilty conscience, she boarded the plane. In later interviews, she said, "It felt like I was leaving something behind. It was just a horrifying feeling knowing that she was supposed to be there." And she wasn't. I mean, also, you could be like, well, she probably is just like out and about. Like, at this point, she went home with this dude to his hotel or whatever, and she just is like missing her plane. And you just be like, she misses her plane. I'm going home. And then, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like that. It's obviously like, weird, but not like, oh my god, something has gone wrong yet. Naively, Claire's biggest concern was that Natalie was about to be in big trouble with her parents. I don't think that's naive. I think at this point, that's the natural assumption. She had no idea how much worse the situation truly was. Before boarding the flight themselves, one of the chaperones placed a call to Beth in Alabama to deliver the concerning news. Despite their efforts to keep the mother calm, Beth was inconsolable. Quote, "I knew it instantly when I received that call that just from Natalie's history and character and just her record, I knew instantly that she'd either been kidnapped or murdered. There was no hesitation. Absolutely none. Absolutely none." Back in the States, Beth hung up the phone and jumped into her car. She started speeding home, making calls to 911 and her ex-husband along the way. While en route, she pushed her car to over 120 miles per hour until she was eventually pulled over by a state trooper. Hearing her story, the trooper then put her in contact with the FBI. Fucking legend. Absolute legend. She's speeding massively, and she just explains it to him, and he's like, holy lady, okay, let's get the FBI on the radio. Once Natalie had been officially declared missing, the first thing Beth, Jug, and several close friends of their family decided to do was rent a private jet to fly down to Aruba themselves. Oh yeah, they're all rich. I'm like, god damn, okay. They couldn't stand the thought of sitting idly by and wanted to begin a search of their own, believing that the Aruban police were not taking the case seriously. We'll talk about why they believed this in just a bit. Again, not crazy unreasonable. Not crazy unreasonable. As soon as the plane landed, Beth took charge of the impromptu investigation. She led their group to the Holiday Inn Resort, where they searched Natalie's room and then asked to speak with the manager. With her help, Beth was allowed to review footage from the hotel's security cameras, which is how she got her first look at the mysterious boy known to her as Joran. She watched as Natalie and Joran stood at the bar together, taking shots and chatting. She then watched as they exited the casino with her friends. Initially, Beth believed that tracking Joran down would be difficult, considering they were in an unfamiliar country, and Joran was a guest from yet another unfamiliar country. But to her surprise, the hotel's manager was able to identify Joran with ease. She said that his name was Joran van der Sloot, and that he was a 17-year-old local high school student. Okay. I mean, he does sound very Dutch. Van der Sloot is perhaps the most Dutch name that I've ever heard, but that's because this is a Dutch island. So he's a local, huh? Yet despite, that's more concerning just because it's a lie. He told a lie. Yet despite what Joran had told Natalie and her friends, he was not a college student from the Netherlands. He was a local resident of Aruba that had a reputation among the staff of several nearby hotels as a party boy who would float between bars to seduce and pick up women while gambling. He would present himself as a tourist to keep those around him at ease, but that was just part of his pickup game. That's very sleazy, isn't it? Before the sun had even set on Beth's first day in Aruba, she'd already had a solid lead on the last person her daughter had been seen with. Before long, after bribing a few locals with cash, she also had a lead on who else was in the car outside of Carlos and Charlie's the prior night. two brothers, 21-year-old Deepak Kalpo and 18-year-old Satish Kalpo. Hoping to confront Joran himself, Beth and the rest of the Twitty family quickly made their way to the Van der Sloot residence, which they also found using information obtained by bribing more locals. You go to a fat stack of cash in your private jet and you get to bribe him. At the front door, they were greeted by Joran's father, Paulus van der Sloot. However, if they thought Paulus would be any help to them, they were wrong. Beth was stonewalled by Paulus, who was an attorney training to be a judge. He told her that they didn't have any right to show up at his door asking questions, and that Joran didn't have to speak with her if he didn't want to. I mean, he's bang on. He did eventually call Joran and request that he return home, but Beth stated that she found Paulus's overall demeanor concerning. Her daughter had dropped off the face of the earth, was possibly injured and in need of help, but Paulus had no desire to help find her, which is unusual for a parent of a kid the same age. Instead, he was intentionally placing himself between Beth and the only person who might be able to provide answers. Even though Joran was his son, she believed that was extremely suspicious. Yeah, I kinda agree. I think that is real suspicious, because any parent in that situation would be like, oh my god, what's my son done? Oh, for fuck's sake. Let me find your daughter, I'll help you, and then we'll see what's really going on here. We're in this together. But the fact that it's not like that is weird. When Joran finally arrived home after a tense wait, he was once again accompanied by the Kalpos. By now, tensions at the home were beginning to get heated, and things only escalated when Joran denied that he'd ever met Natalie. Bruh. They're like, we saw you in the security footage room. What do you think's happening? It's not that long ago. It's 20 years ago, but there was there was security cameras everywhere. It's 20 years ago. According to Beth, she wanted to hit Joran the moment he told her such a bold-faced lie, but thankfully didn't. Instead, she allowed the rational part of her brain to take control and confronted the teen with the video evidence and multiple witness accounts that she had acquired that placed him and Natalie together the prior evening. Faced with this, Joran then changed his story. Now he admitted that he and Natalie had hung out the prior night, but his admission did little to ease the tension in the air. While using very sexually explicit language to describe Natalie, Joran told Beth that her daughter had been wasted and hanging all over him at the bar. Bro. Why do you have to use sexually explicit language? She's a mother, for God's sake. He said that once Carlos and Charlie's closed, he, Deepak, and Satish had offered her a ride back to her hotel, but she had refused, saying that she wanted to stop and see the sharks on the beach one final time before heading home. They agreed and drove her to a lighthouse on Aruba's Arashi Beach, known as the California Lighthouse. After spending some time together there, the Kalpo brothers finished driving them back to the Holiday Inn at around 2 a.m. Now, because Natalie was stumbling drunk by this point, Joran offered to help her to her room, but once again she refused. As the Kalpos were about to drive away, Joran said that he noticed a man in a security guard's uniform approaching her, offering his assistance. He had assumed that Natalie would be fine and hadn't seen her since. The Kalpos confirmed Joran's story. Don't care about what the Kalpos confirm or not. What I care about is whether the security footage of a casino, where there will be security cameras everywhere, proves this. Upon hearing Joran's new version of events, Beth says she felt her heart sink. She knew deep down that Joran was still lying, but had no way to prove it. She requested to search the Kalpo brothers' car, but they refused. Then Paulus ordered her and her family away from his house. Feeling lost, and knowing that they would get no further that night, Beth then returned to the Holiday Inn, where she was once again permitted to view security footage from the previous night. She looked at different cameras this time, ones that were on the building's exterior, but as suspected, there were no sign of the Kalpo brothers' car, of Joran and Natalie, at any point around 2 a.m. Natalie was also never seen re-entering the hotel through the lobby, the building's only accessible entrance. Joran, you trying to get caught in a lie, mate, because you must know that there's cameras everywhere. Discouraged, Beth decided to pack it in for the night. She was allowed to stay in the room that contained Natalie's luggage and personal belongings free of charge, marking the end of her first day on the island. I get the feeling, considering that she flew down in a private jet, that she's probably not like, oh, thanks for letting me have it for free. The Great Search. Now that you've officially met our full cast of characters, it's time for me to explain why Beth Twitty felt the need to metaphorically don a fedora and pull out her magnifying glass instead of allowing the Aruban authorities to handle the situation themselves. Beth states that one of the class's chaperones had attempted to have an investigation into Natalie's disappearance opened in Aruba before she'd even arrived on the island, but was told that no investigation was warranted at that time. According to the chaperone, Aruban police claimed that the situation was not nearly as severe as it first seemed because many tourists go missing for a day or two while on the island for a variety of innocent reasons. Again, I can't say that the police are at fault here because I'm sure that this is true. That people do go missing for a few days. They're having a good time. They're, up to stuff. And then they just come back and Miss Muffle, I'm in big trouble with my parents. Bada bing, bada boom. Probably how almost every case resolves itself. So can't be super blaming on the police yet, in my opinion. And I think, of course, the mother here would be like, this is not like her. But the police's natural response to be like that would be like,
yeah, look, as far as you know, lady.
And not unreasonably so, I have to say. Some young women, they said, go wild while on vacation. They start partying, taking drugs, hooking up with random men, taking more drugs. They lose track of time and drop off the radar for a few days before eventually sobering up. It happened almost daily, so there was no urgent need to organize a search at that time. Beth was told the same thing when she arrived and attempted to have a case opened several hours later. When Beth urgently told the police that Natalie wasn't that type of girl, they refused to listen and simply assured her that they would help her daughter get back to the United States once she reappeared. This, Beth states, is what prompted the Holloway family to take matters into their own hands. The day after she arrived on the island, Natalie's father, Dave, landed with even more family members in tow, all of whom planned to organize a search team and set out to comb the small 70-square-mile island from end to end. They put up missing persons posters, walked the beaches, scoured the known drug dens in the areas, used even more cash to bribe locals for information, and visited multiple police stations. They were hoping to find Natalie alive, but Dave also feared the worst. Quote, I just kept it to myself. But I knew that I was going to Aruba for recovery, because I knew that after 24 or 48 hours, if you haven't heard from them, it's not a good situation. Oh my god, dude, that is so grim. Now, it should be noted that representatives from Aruba dispute Beth's claim and say that they were taking steps to find Natalie, but couldn't disclose specifics to the Holloway family at such an early stage. They said that they were monitoring Joran's movements in secret and attempting to obtain a warrant for a wiretap, but Beth's interfering was causing problems for them. It cannot be proven which version of events is true because records of these early days have never been released. However, what can be proven is what happened next. Now, we started this episode by discussing how the American media is inclined to latch on to stories about tourists that go missing while abroad. But you should be aware that that inclination is multiplied exponentially when the missing person is an attractive young woman. Speaking respectfully, Natalie was gorgeous and her picture was perfect for primetime TV news. When it became clear to the Holloways that they were on her own, Beth began contacting members of the American media to tell her story. Within a few days, journalists began flocking to the island with cameras. They interviewed Beth inside Natalie's hotel room, where she told the world her version of events for the first time. This did wonders to get the public interested in Natalie's case, as Beth was a sympathetic person in a truly unimaginable situation, which only encouraged more feverish reporting from over 26 separate countries. As you can imagine, this was not a good look for the Aruban authorities, who were being dragged through the mud by every talking head on the evening news. Within days of this story breaking, calls for action were coming in from all angles. People in both America and Aruba were pissed, as were government officials from Alabama, who began asking for the US federal government to step in, saying that not enough was being done to bring Natalie home. The FBI was already assisting Aruba in the investigation, but the public's perception was that assisting simply wasn't good enough. But what do you want them to do? They're the FBI. Their jurisdiction is America, not, I don't know if Aruba's its own country or a Dutch overseas territory, but there's no jurisdiction there. They can assist and that's it. What do you want to do? March in the military and take over? News stations reported on Aruba as if it were a lawless land of gamblers, drug dealers, and murderers, which wasn't true, but it made for good TV. Thankfully, one good thing that came from this whole mess was, with the eyes of the world now upon them, a fire had effectively been lit underneath the Aruban government. The search that David organized was revamped and made official, and thousands of government employees and civil servants were given time off to participate. Okay, I get why, even if you're the parents in this situation and you're like, yeah, it's kind of reasonable that the police are doing this, logically, you still want to be like, they're rubbish, they're not doing enough, because it will light that fire and it will get them into action, perhaps beyond what even might be considered appropriate at that time. Now they had the numbers, the team physically did walk from one end of the island to the other, searching for anything that could point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, they found little. To encourage witnesses to come forward, Natalie's family put out a $175,000 reward for any information that could lead to a safe return. This amount was increased to $195,000 when Aruba's tourism board offered another $20,000 of their own money to go with it. This was done in an attempt just to help stop the PR nightmare the island had suddenly found itself in. As all this was happening, detectives in Aruba had also ramped up their investigation into two suspects who they thought might be able to provide some answers. They were security guards from a nearby hotel, Nick John and Abraham Jones. Both were brought in for questioning on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. Wait, Joran? No? These random security guards, what have they got to do with it? While not officially confirmed by Aruban authorities, it is strongly suspected that Joran and the Calpo brothers' statements were the primary evidence against these men. They were suspected of being the security guards seen helping Natalie outside of the Holiday Inn resort on the night that she was last seen. Like Joran himself, John and Jones were also both known for picking up young female tourists, and one of them had a prior criminal record. And he's a security guard. Okay. However, while the police may have been relying on the three boys' story to arrest the two guards, it soon became apparent that they were not beyond suspicion themselves. On June the 9th, 2005, Joran and Calpos were also arrested and charged for the same crimes, kidnapping and murder. Good. These are our main suspects, in my opinion. The security guards are just like a scapegoat that this Joran guy's like, no, it was them, in my opinion. According to the police, they had no physical evidence to tie anyone, John, Jones, Joran, or the Calpos, to the disappearance, but the law in Aruba states that suspects can be held for a short time period based on strong suspicion. This prevents suspects from fleeing while also allowing the police to conduct additional investigations without fear of interference. After it became clear that neither Nick, John, nor Abraham Jones was involved, both were released without ever being officially charged. Joran and the Calpos, however, were not released as they were deemed to be the most likely suspects. Yes, good. So far, so good. When Beth learned that Joran had been arrested, she was happy to see that progress was finally being made, as she never stopped believing that he was somehow involved. Yeah, of course. Like, he just lied straight to her face, and she knew he lied. Her suspicion was confirmed when Joran changed his story yet again while in custody. This time, while most of the specifics about the early night stayed the same, Joran admitted that his and Natalie's night together concluded with him leaving her alone on the beach after she rejected his proposal for sex when he couldn't find a condom. His pride was hurt, he said, and he had not wanted to see her anymore. The only reason he had lied to Beth about dropping her off at the hotel, he said, was that he was embarrassed because leaving her behind was a childish thing to do. He claimed to have no idea where she'd gone after leaving her there because he had gone straight home. Okay, well, this is exactly the sort of much more believable story that Joran comes up with after he's had time to think about things, allegedly, in my opinion. Finger pointing, false leads, and other serious confusions. As Joran and the Calpos sat in jail, investigators were very hopeful that one of the boys would flip on the rest, as is typical in this sort of situation, but that didn't happen. All three stuck to Joran's new story of leaving Natalie at the beach and refused to offer more information. Still, despite this, many at the department felt certain that they were guilty, primarily because each boy's version of events varied slightly and contained conflicting information surrounding the minor details of the night. It seemed as if they had colluded at some point to decide on a definitive narrative, but had not thought of everything. Yeah, as is inevitable. Of course. With a warrant in hand, police searched several key locations for any usable evidence, but this proved as fruitless as their earlier search of the beach. The Van der Sloot residence was clean, and although the trunk of the Calpo brothers' car initially appeared to contain several large bloodstains, forensic analysis later determined that there was no blood present. It was a false lead, meaning that authorities still had nothing on the boys. Yeah, because you've given them, you've tipped your hand, and they've got time to come up with stories and clear up evidence, that kind of stuff. Making matters even worse, this failure was followed by one of the first major public blunders in the case. On June the 11th, a spokesperson for the Aruban Minister of Justice falsely claimed to the media that Natalie was confirmed dead and that her body had been discovered. He later retracted this statement and apologized, saying he had been seriously misinformed by an officer who erroneously indicated that Joran and the Calpo brothers had made a confession, admitted to killing Natalie on the beach, and agreed to take officers to the location of the murder. But this was simply not true. Big whoops. What? That is an insane mistake to make. That is a colossal level of error. Complicating things even further, on June the 22nd, Joran Van der Sloot's father, Paulus, was taken in for questioning and then arrested as well. It's not clear why he was detained, but authorities stated they had reason to believe he was attempting to hide evidence of Joran's guilt and did not want to cooperate with the investigation out of fear of implicating either Joran or possibly himself. They also believed that he may have used his knowledge of the law to help Joran and the Calpos set their stories straight. Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but I wouldn't be surprised. Police hoped that his incarceration would apply pressure to Joran and force him to come clean, but this didn't work either. Joran stuck to his new story, and Paulus was released 4 days after his arrest on June 26th, at which time he immediately filed multiple lawsuits against the Aruban government, one to maintain his position as a judge and another for damages to his reputation. Initially, he won both lawsuits, although the latter would be overturned years later. According to Beth, she was discouraged when she learned of Paulus's release because she, too, had become convinced of his guilt. However, she was even more discouraged by what came next. On July 4, 2005, a judge ordered that the Calpos be released as well after the public became aware that no evidence against them had been discovered despite the extensive investigation. And again, fair. Like, that judge is ordering that because he's like, yo, you can't keep holding them if there's no evidence. It's all circumstantial. Do I think it's good? No. Do I think it's right? Yeah, it's probably how the law works, and most of the time that's a good thing. This prompted Beth to turn to the media for help once again by making a series of inflammatory statements on live TV, including one where she said, 2 suspects were released yesterday who were involved in a violent crime against my daughter. Yo, you asking for trouble? You gonna get sued, lady. These statements were not well received by some Aruban locals who thought that Beth was speaking irresponsibly and tried to stir up more trouble for them back in the States. In fact, although the Aruban public had been on her side throughout the early stages of the search, their patience with her shenanigans was wearing thin. And again, not super surprising. Protesters took to the streets outside her hotel around this time, demanding that she either respect Aruba's justice system or go home. This prompted Beth to make a public apology to the Aruban protesters. However, she wasn't the only one facing criticism. In an attempt to make themselves seem more competent and to shift some blame, Aruban authorities also made a controversial move that would further drive a wedge between themselves and the Holloways. Aruba's police commissioner, Gerald Dompig, publicly attacked Natalie's character by saying, "There was a lot of wild partying, a lot of drinking, lots of room switching every night. We know that the Holiday Inn told them they weren't welcome next year. Natalie, we know, drank all day every day. We have statements that she started every morning with cocktails. So much drinking that Natalie didn't show up for breakfast 2 mornings." I mean, it's a holiday. You're 18 years old on Aruba in Aruba with all of your mates. Not showing up on breakfast because you're outrageously hungover is like, yeah, I mean, so? Beth resented these attacks on her daughter's character, but there was little she could do about them at the time. Her only consolation was that Joran remained in custody because he was the person the police still most strongly suggested of being involved in the disappearance. After the Calpos were released, the judge overseeing Joran's case had ordered that he remain in custody for an additional 60 days so that further investigations could be conducted. While this war for the public sympathy was playing out on television, the search for Natalie continued in the background. However, hope that she would be found alive was rapidly dwindling. By now, she'd been missing for over 6 weeks, and on June the 17th, a piece of duct tape was discovered on Aruba's northeast coast that had the potential to confirm everyone's worst fears. It had several strands of blonde hair stuck to its underside. With the permission of the Aruban government, the tape was sent off to the FBI's crime lab in Quantico, Virginia, and 3 F-16 aircraft were deployed by the Royal Netherlands Air Force to search the beach where the tape had been discovered. Okay. They used infrared cameras, but came up empty-handed. Disappointingly, on July 28th, 11 days after the tape's discovery, the FBI announced that the hair did not belong to Natalie. This was a crushing bit of news, but there was little time to dwell on it, as another tip had already begun to refocus the search elsewhere. Sometime in late July of 2005, a gardener informed police that he had personally witnessed Joran van der Sloot and 2 other men dumping the body of a young woman into a small pond near the Aruba Racket Club, which was located near the Marriott Hotel. The gardener said that this interaction had occurred around 2 a.m. on the morning of May the 30th, and that van der Sloot had attempted to hide his face, but was easily recognizable. For Aruban police, this tip was significant for multiple reasons. Not only did it provide a potential location to search for Natalie's body, but it also came from a witness who could testify that Joran had been lying about going home directly after leaving Natalie behind on the beach. Bro, why you saw someone dumping a body? That's the immediate you go to the police for. You're not like, no, I'll go. Maybe I'll go later. What the f***? Gardener, get your together. This witness statement was used publicly as further justification to keep Joran in custody. The same night this tip was received, large fences were erected around the pond and a crew of volunteer firefighters were brought in to begin draining the water. 3,600 gallons were pumped away every minute for nearly 15 hours straight until only a few feet of water remained. According to Jug Twitty, this was the tip that the family felt was most promising. Quoting him, "It's the first time the fire department, the police, and other authorities have collaborated on such a huge search, so they must know something. There's so much commotion." While the search of the pond was being conducted, the family was asked to stay outside the fence for their own sake. Initially, they protested, but the threat of seeing Natalie's body in such a poor state after being submerged for weeks persuaded them. They decided to return to the hotel rooms and wait for the police to publicly announce their findings. Surprisingly, as the water was being drained, yet another witness came forward with even more information, although this information conflicted with the first tip. This time, a man known only as the Jogger claimed to have seen several men burying a blonde-haired woman in a landfill on the night Natalie disappeared. Oh my god, what's up with this crime? People were like, oh no, Aruba's not too bad. It's like, yeah, except all these people just witnessing people disposing of bodies and not saying. According to Tim Miller, the director of Texas EcuSearch, a non-profit volunteer-based organization that provides search and recovery services, quote, "The Jogger said he saw a face, blonde hair, and a woman's chest, and that the body was dumped and covered." Along with volunteers from Texas EcuSearch, FBI cadaver dogs were brought in, and the area was excavated using heavy machinery, but no body was found. Now, once again, all the family's hopes lay at the bottom of the pond that was still being drained. However, this also proved to be a disappointment in the end, as the authorities found nothing of significance under the water either. It, too, was just another false tip. As some have speculated, the reason for these multiple false tips in rapid succession was likely a result of the reward money being increased to $1 million just a few days earlier. People were throwing out possible locations on the slim chance that they were right. Yeah, that's the problem with these big rewards. It's like, yeah, no, I saw someone dumping a body in a landfill, and then the police will go search the landfill just as like a potential likely place, because the jogger's like, yeah, it could have been buried there. The police go out and search, and they find it, and then the jogger gets $1 million, even though he was like, just made that up, just was playing the odds. Oh yeah, now I see how this happens. Okay, never mind. After suffering crushing blow after crushing blow, Beth Holloway returned home after nearly 2 months on the island. By now, she was physically and emotionally exhausted and could not bear to carry on without a break, although she made it clear that she'd be returning soon to continue the search. You could be certain that the journalists who had moved into hotel rooms beside her planned to report on Beth's return when it occurred. However, something in the distance was brewing that would refocus the media's attention for months. What was in 2005? Was there any big news in 2005? I guess we're about to find out, and then people will be like, Simon, how do you not remember that terrorist attack or whatever? But let's find out. A small storm. Okay. Hurricane Katrina, 2005? 2004? When was Hurricane Katrina? Oh, let's just go on. Let's just stop playing guessing games. On August the 23rd, 2005, a tropical depression formed over the Bahamas that soon intensified into a tropical storm. 2 days later, on August the 25th, I can already see it in a few lines, the word Katrina. There we go. This storm further intensified and was reclassified as a hurricane just 2 hours before making landfall at Hallandale Beach, just north of Miami, Florida. This hurricane was known as Katrina. After wreaking havoc across southern Florida for several hours, the storm proceeded into the Gulf of Mexico, where it intensified yet again into a Category 5 hurricane, meaning that its winds reached up to 155 miles per hour. Category 5 is the maximum category, right? This is strong enough to level entire homes and rip trees, roots and all, from the ground. Thankfully, Katrina was downgraded to a Category 3 before making landfall a second time and moving further inland. However, this did not prevent it from being famously devastating. It's at these times I'm like, you know, as much as like living in Florida or like the south of America where the weather's pretty nice all the time, you're like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. But also storms. California, earthquakes. In Europe, it's like, yeah, the weather's a bit worse, but there's no like disasters other than war. In total, 1,800 Americans died during Katrina. God damn. That's a lot. Earning it a reputation as one of the worst storms in US history. Along with them, thousands of homes were destroyed and over 3 million people were left without power for nearly a month. Most notably, the city of New Orleans was most heavily affected as its flood protection system failed, allowing over 80% of the city to be flooded. Rushing water cut communication networks, destroyed roads, bridges, and emergency shelters, and left tens of thousands of people stranded for weeks. It was so colossally terrible that the federal government classified over 90,000 square miles, an area roughly the size of the entire UK, a disaster zone. The total cost of the damage was estimated to be upwards of $125 billion. Good lord, I forgot how bad Katrina was. From the moment Katrina made landfall, Natalie's story was doomed to fall by the wayside, at least temporarily. As compelling as it was, the aerial footage of people stranded on their own rooftops, waving for help to the helicopters above them, was far too interesting for the public to ignore. This footage now began airing around the clock. However, as horrible as the situation was, Beth barely noticed it. Her mind was still in Aruba, where even more drama was unfolding. Yeah, of course. Because one is like a terrible thing, and one is a terrible thing that's happening to you. Of course, you're going to pay more attention to the terrible thing that's happening to you. I'll be like, if my favorite takeaway restaurant is closed when I want dinner, I'm probably going to be more upset about that for a moment than I am about the war in Ukraine, because one directly affects me. Like, obviously, one is not worse. But it's like, because it's more personal, it's closer to you, it feels more. That's a weird thing to say. It's an extreme example, I know. But, like, you know what I mean. On the 26th of August, the Kalpo brothers were rearrested alongside another man, 21-year-old Freddie Alexander Zidane Arambatzis, who was accused of taking photographs of underage girls without their permission. According to authorities, this new arrest had nothing to do with the Holloway investigation, but the brothers' attorneys disagreed, as did Joran van der Sloot's mother, Anita van der Sloot. She stated publicly, "It's a desperate attempt to get the boys to talk, but there is nothing to talk about. It's a lovely picture of a young girl in a bikini." When news of this arrest hit the front page in Aruba, the Kalpo brothers' attorney brought the issue to a judge who declared that the police once again overstepped their bounds. On September the 3rd, a week after their arrest, the Kalpo brothers were once again released, and this time around they were not alone. Joran was also ordered to be released as well. I mean, you can't hold people in prison for a really long-ass time just on suspicion. You have to come up with something, and as bad as it is, if this guy is responsible, they don't have anything. And the laws are like this to protect innocent people. So I can't criticize it too much. Even though, you know me, I'm like number one person to criticize the police for being shit. But in this case, they're following the law. Unsurprisingly, after being held in custody for nearly 3 months, Joran was eager to escape Aruba and the whole Holloway mess. He boarded a plane to the Netherlands, where he stayed with some of his extended family and soon enrolled himself in college. However, the media followed him there, and he found that his family's name was permanently marred. Seeking to beat the charges in the court of public opinion, Joran then did something unexpected. He gave an interview to ABC News' Primetime in February 2006, in which he detailed how he met Natalie, what they did together, and what he thought about the Aruban and FBI's investigations. While speaking on air, Joran admitted that he was wrong to leave Natalie on the beach alone, and that he regretted it. He also said that he regretted lying to the police and the Holloways at first, but claimed that he only did it because Beth and her family were being so hostile toward him. He said that they, and the police, had already determined his guilt before even speaking with him, and because of that, he was afraid to tell the truth. Quoting him, "They showed up at our house, screaming and yelling, cussing. The way they were putting pressure on us just probably made us want to lie more, because it seemed like we were in big trouble." When the interviewer asked Joran what he would say to Natalie if he saw her again, Joran replied, "If I were to see her, if she were to be found tomorrow, I think I'd hate her. If she really ran away from home, if she did something like that, I'd hate her." Obviously, Joran was pissed and didn't care who knew it, so he used this interview as an opportunity to attack Beth. He said that Natalie referred to her as Hitler's sister. In later media interviews, Joran also attacked Natalie herself, saying that she made several racist remarks throughout their night together, including when she jokingly asked if Deepak and Satish, who were both black, were Joran's slaves. Oh my god. Tasteful. But I don't think she said this, just to be clear. Like, I think he's just spinning a story. In my opinion, because I don't think very much of this dude, I think he's spinning a story to make himself look better. Disgusted by these comments, as well as a lack of progress in the criminal case against Joran, Beth began seeking justice through other legal avenues. She filed a civil suit against Joran and his father in the Supreme Court of the state of New York, in which she alleged that Joran engaged in behavior that showed malicious, wanton, and willful disregard of the rights, safety, and well-being of Natalee Holloway. This is not going to work out. You're suing them in New York. They're from Aruba. It's a civil case. They're just not going to go. Paulus van der Sloot was accused of enabling his son's delinquent behavior by allowing him to drink and gamble while underage. In truth, many legal experts agreed that this lawsuit was doomed from the start for several reasons, but Beth felt that she was running out of other options. She no longer trusted the Aruban police in the slightest, just as she no longer trusted Aruba's court system. This is why she had chosen to file the suit in the United States instead of Aruba. However, this decision was what ultimately led to the case being dismissed 6 months later on August 3rd, 2006, when Judge Barbara Kapnick ruled that Beth had filed her suit in an inconvenient forum. Yeah, you gotta sue them in Aruba. In an interview with the media, Joran's attorney, Joseph Takapina, stated, "We were never afraid of the facts in this case. Joran did nothing to this girl. He's trying to get on with his life." In my opinion, I do believe that Joran was trying to move on, but the interviews he gave and Beth's lawsuits against the Van der Sloot family breathed new life into the case. Plus, around this time, both Beth and Dave also released their own separate books detailing their experiences as a way to keep the case in the public's eye. Dave's was titled Aruba, the tragic untold story of Natalee Holloway and corruption in paradise. Beth's was titled Loving Natalie, a mother's testament of hope and faith. In Dave's book, he strongly implied that Joran had gotten away with murder. It sounds like you're inviting some civil lawsuits of your own right there. In response to these published allegations, Joran van der Sloot teamed up with a Dutch reporter named Zvezdana Vukajevits to release a book of their own. It was written in Dutch, but the title was translated to The Case of Natalee Holloway, My Own Story About Her Disappearance in Aruba. In it, van der Sloot recounts his own version of events and investigation, much of which we've already discussed, and reasserts his innocence. During an interview at the time of the book's release, he told the media, quote, "I see this book as my opportunity to be open and honest about everything that happened for anyone who wants to read it. I understand that my lies in the past seriously tarnish my credibility and that some people will not believe what is written in this book. Still, I feel that contributing to this book is something I have to do. I hope to contribute in this way to recovering the truth." Later, he also said, quoting again, "I want to apologize to Natalie's parents, Dave Holloway and Beth Twitty, and to both of their families for the fact that I initially made up my statements. I can't say that I agree with many of the things they did, but the pain of not knowing where their daughter is and what happened to her must be unimaginably great. I hope every day that Natalie will be found." Well, this book was never translated into English and did not result in van der Sloot's name being cleared. In fact, it only served to renew interest in the case once again, which prompted the Aruban police to refocus their efforts on investigating him. On April the 27th, 2006, 11 months after Natalie's disappearance, a team of 20 investigators descended on the van der Sloot residence in Aruba. Although police insist that this was not retribution for the book's release, they have failed to disclose what new evidence warranted this raid. They searched the property's grounds for a burial site using shovels, long metal rods, and radar technology. Finding nothing, they then seized journals that belonged to Joran's mother and father, as well as a personal computer, which they later were forced to return after Paulus threatened yet another lawsuit. And again, fair play. He wants his computer back. He's like, guys, you got nothing. I want my computer back. 99% of the time, is to protect innocent. It protects innocent people. 2 weeks later, the police executed a similar search of the Calpo brothers' residence. Once again, they stated that they were acting on a tip, but refused to elaborate. The police left that day without discovering or seizing anything. However, the Calpos were arrested for a third time anyway after both reportedly became belligerent and objected to the search. Public backlash for these searches came quickly, leading the police to give this very vague justification for them during a press release. Quote, "We needed to get a better image of the place or circumstances where an offense may have been committed and to understand the chain of events leading to the offense." As some have speculated, another reason that these searches may have been conducted was that somebody had finally run the numbers and discovered that over 40% of Aruba's operational budget for the prior year, 2005, had been spent on the Holloway's case alone. Granted, this was only $3 million, but still, 40%. The police needed something, anything to show for it. But it didn't work out for them, and the case went cold. A little over a year later, Joran and the Calpos would be rearrested yet again after Aruban authorities announced that they had made a break in the case. However, their new evidence fell through, and all 3 boys were released 3 weeks later. Not long after this, authorities publicly announced that they were officially dropping the case against Joran and the Calpos indefinitely. Beth was devastated. She and Jug Twitty soon filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Wow, so this destroyed their relationship, basically. The recording. In late 2007, theories about what had happened to Natalie were everywhere. Obviously, the most popular was that she had been killed, likely by Joran, but there were many others. Some suggested that she'd been sold into sex slavery, as there was a rumor that pornographic videos of her existed on several popular adult websites. These videos were later analyzed, and women in them were determined not to be Natalie, but the theory remained in the public's consciousness regardless. Among the less sinister theories, some believe that she may have voluntarily run away, citing her high school yearbook quote as proof. Wait, the quote that she said she's got lots of places to see. That means she just wants to go traveling, not disappear from her life. Don't read into it too much. Others wondered if she may have drowned while attempting to go night swimming after Joran left her behind. Of these two, the latter certainly seems more plausible, but nothing could be proven. So the mystery continued. However, on January the 31st, 2008, a Dutch journalist named Peter de Vries made an announcement that had the potential to change everything. In a public statement, de Vries said that he had solved Natalie's murder by obtaining undeniable proof that Joran van der Sloot was her killer, as he had tricked Joran into unwittingly providing a full confession to one of his associates. This confession, he said, had been recorded and would be aired on Dutch television in exactly 3 days on February the 3rd. At this point, all eyes tuned in to watch, causing it to become the most viewed non-sports program in Dutch television history. Good Lord! Wait, but we know for a fact, because Matt told us at the beginning, that this episode doesn't conclude until late last year, basically. So we know that this isn't enough. But then what the hell does he have? When the special aired, de Vries explained that he had hired a former convict named Patrick van der Eem to approach Joran and slowly and methodically befriend him. He said this undercover operation took approximately 7 months, but that by the end of it, Joran had obviously begun to trust van der Eem wholeheartedly. When de Vries and van der Eem felt that Joran was ready to confess, de Vries provided van der Eem with a Range Rover equipped with 3 video cameras and a microphone to secretly record his and Joran's conversation. Van der Eem then spent one afternoon driving Joran around town while pressuring him to speak candidly about what exactly had happened to Natalie. Bro, Joran, are you really gonna say it's a dude you've only known for 7 months and he's pressuring you to talk about, allegedly this terrible crime you committed? If you say this, that's insanely dumb, dude. In the recording, Joran can be heard saying that he really did bring Natalie to the beach that night with the intention of having sex with her, but she was so intoxicated that she had passed out and begun violently shaking. He then stated that when she stopped shaking, he was unable to determine if she was alive or dead, so he rushed to a nearby payphone to call a friend for help. That friend arrived at the beach, informed him that Natalie was dead, and helped him load her body into his boat. The friend then sailed out into the ocean and dumped her overboard. This was done because Joran feared that he would be accused of killing her. Whoa. That is a twist I did not expect. Is this what actually happens then? But then, how do we know? Why does this not conclude until so many years later? It's 14 years after even this is happening. After this bombshell admission, Joran then told van der Eem that he was nervous about being caught that night, but that his friend had reassured him everything would be okay. If the police ever started asking questions, they'd just deny everything, assured that Natalie's body would never be recovered from the shark-infested waters. They both then agreed to play it cool, go to school the following day, and get on with their lives as if nothing had happened. Almost immediately, the Aruban police announced that they were reopening their investigation into Joran and hinted that an arrest was imminent. However, they jumped the gun a little, as to everyone's surprise, their request for an arrest warrant was denied. Okay, it seems a bit weird, but let me explain. In the 3 days between the tape's announcement and its release, Joran made a call to a Dutch TV station to offer an interview. He knew, it seemed, exactly what was on the tape. He wanted to get ahead of the story. While talking on the air, he claimed that his confession was completely fabricated, that he had been under the influence of marijuana inside the car with van der Eem, and that he was simply trying to impress the man with a good story. That is what he wanted to hear, so I told him what he wanted to hear. I mean, a confession in this case is really easy to recount because it's just bullshit. That's just bullshit. On February the 8th, Joran then voluntarily met with investigators in the Netherlands to officially state the same thing on the record. Lending credit to his denial, the friend who allegedly helped him dispose of Natalie's body had an alibi for the night, meaning that particular part of the confession was almost certainly false. This cast serious doubt on the tape as a whole, since there was no independent evidence to corroborate the confession. A judge ruled that it was not enough. The police then appealed the judge's decision, but this appeal was denied as well. I mean, again, not super surprising when a part of the story is proven to be made up. Unsurprisingly, despite the official ruling, the public began to seriously debate whether or not the confession was genuine, causing it to become a major talking point for Dutch and US media. Psychologists and criminologists were brought onto news programs to analyze and provide a breakdown of the tape, many of whom sided with Joran. Law experts also stated that the manner in which the tape had been released would make it next to impossible to use against him in court. Had de Vries turned it over to Dutch authorities immediately, it was possible the police could have worked behind the scenes to corroborate the confession before the general public and Joran became aware of it. However, solving Natalie's murder seemed nowhere near as important to de Vries as boosting his television show's ratings. Yeah, It is kind of his job. And if that weren't bad enough, it took less than 1 month for the tape to lose its last remaining shred of credibility. In March of 2008, approximately 1 month after De Vries' program aired, Patrick van der Eem was captured on a hot mic admitting that he had lied about several of the key facts stated within the program. Bruh, you ruining your career right now. After an interview with journalist John Anthony Castro, van der Eem was told that the cameras and microphones around him were turned off, but they weren't. Now, speaking candidly, van der Eem admitted that his story about going undercover to earn Joran's trust had been a lie, and that the two of them had known each other for years. He also said he was simply using the Holloway case as a way to earn money, and that he expected to be a millionaire by the end of the year because he just signed a book deal. Dude, that is super fucking sketchy, my dude, in my opinion. It is unclear if Joran was even aware of this scheme or if he was an unwilling participant. Truthfully, I think this situation has the potential to be hilarious, but what happened next makes it no laughing matter. When van der Eem learned that his admission had been captured, he made a series of violent threats against Castro, which prompted Castro to turn the recording over to his attorney, who then contacted the police. In response, the Aruban Justice Department asked Castro not to release the tape immediately, as they felt it would further complicate their investigation. When the public learned of this tape's existence, however, van der Eem became unhinged and was arrested later that year for fleeing the police after beating his girlfriend with a crowbar. Bruh. 2 years later, in 2010, Castro was assassinated outside his own home. No charges have ever been filed against Patrick van der Eem, and the murder remains unsolved to this day. Good lord. He died because of this, allegedly. That's f***ed up. The despicable deception. Now with that brief tragedy out of the way, let us now fully return our attention to Joran. As we have already discussed, Joran found himself unemployable in the wake of Natalie's disappearance. So around 2008, he began looking for new ways to make money. First, he returned to Aruba and tried his hand at professional poker, but quickly found himself in massive debt. Whoops-a-daisy. With creditors closing in and no options remaining, his mother, Anita, claims that he fell into a deep depression. At one point, his mental state became so bad that she attempted to have him involuntarily committed, but he left Aruba before authorities could locate him. Now unable to return home, Joran's desperation reached new levels, causing him to try a new approach to making money, embracing his infamy instead of distancing himself from it. Taking a page out of van der Eem's book, Joran began contacting news networks with the promise of revealing never-before-heard details about the case, and even alluded that he might give a full confession on air. Before giving these interviews, however, he would demand money, and then go on to tell lies that sounded believable but were easy to disprove. In one, he confirmed the theory that he had sold Natalie into sex slavery. In another, he asserted that he had paid people hush money to keep a murder a secret. As he claims to have done to van der Eem, he told journalists whatever they wanted to hear and was paid handsomely for it. However, it didn't take long for people to catch on to his lies. Yeah, this is a way to make money that's not going to last very long when everyone realizes that you're just lying for money. When outlets realized that Joran was stringing them along, he then began fabricating evidence to convince them that he was being truthful. Wait, so he's fabricating evidence against himself? In November 2008, he presented a recording of a conversation that was supposedly between him and his father, Paulus, in which Paulus admits to his involvement in covering up Natalie's murder. Analysis later determined the two voices in this recording both belonged to Joran. He was having a conversation with himself and deepening his voice while pretending to speak as his father. Roughly 1 year later, on February the 10th, 2010, Paulus van der Sloot died of a heart attack at the age of 57. I wonder why. Oh my god. Wait. Oh, okay. I don't know if you're implying murder there, Matt, or that it was all very stressful and it finally got him. Now that he had a bit of money in his pocket from this string of deceptions, Joran returned to playing poker and started a YouTube channel where he talked about poker strategy. Oh my. In 2009, he won $12,000 at the Asia Pacific Poker Tour. However, his luck eventually ran out and he lost it all. Yeah, I've known like one professional poker player, and you'd always hear about their big wins, but they never had particularly a lot of money. They were never like well off. But they'd talk, it's like, yeah, I won £60,000 in this like poker tournament. And then you're like, yeah, but you don't seem like the sort of guy who just wins £60,000 regularly. It's just because you don't talk about all the losses. Like winning $12,000 is great, but when you pay like, I don't know, $100 to enter a tournament or whatever, it's like that gets used up real quick. This once again left him looking for a new source of income, but by now, no news stations would return his calls. So he took aim at a new target, Beth Holloway. On March the 29th, 2010, Beth's lawyer, John Q. Kelly, received an email from Joran in which Joran offered to reveal the location of Natalie's body in exchange for $250,000. According to Kelly, he was already very familiar with Joran's lies to the media and didn't believe for a moment that Joran would reveal any legitimate information because doing so would open himself up for prosecution. However, that didn't really matter because getting Joran to admit anything could be useful. In an interview years later, Kelly said, "It was a win-win situation. If the information turned out to be true, Beth would get closure. She'd bring Natalie home. Assuming it was false, it would be extortion and wire fraud once falsehoods are proven. Either way, he'd be boxed in." The reason he's doing this is normally his dad, who's now dead, would be like, "Bruh, this is a lose-lose for you, son." And he'd be like, "Because you're going to get nailed either way." And he'd be like, "Oh yeah, okay. Thanks, Dad." Depending on who you ask, Kelly's next move was either incredibly brave or brazenly stupid. Without telling anyone but his wife and Beth Holloway, Kelly agreed to fly to Aruba to meet with Joran privately inside a hotel room. He told Joran that he'd be bringing $25,000 of the $250,000 as a down payment and would have the rest wired to him after the information Joran provided could be validated. Joran agreed, but Kelly decided at the last minute not to bring any money with him because he felt nervous about the situation. Bro, bringing no money is going to be more nervous for you than bringing money. Because he's going to be like, "Where the fuck's my money at?" Now, he still planned to meet with Joran, but he only did so in an attempt to pry as much information from the man as possible without paying. This didn't go as planned. Yeah, no. Kelly, you're a lawyer. Think things through. When Kelly informed Joran that he hadn't brought the money, Kelly said that Joran got very, very upset. What a surprise. Quoting, "He's a big guy. He's 6'4", 225 pounds, well built. He's sort of a threatening individual when he gets angry, no question. You can look right in his eyes and see he's as cold as ice and pathological." Kelly got out of the hotel room as quickly as possible and boarded a plane back to the US. When he arrived, he contacted the FBI, who then began working with the Aruban government to formulate a plan of action. With the authorities now behind him, Kelly was encouraged to reach out to Joran again and set up a new meeting. This time, the police would be on standby in case anything went wrong. Kelly agreed, but feared that convincing Joran to meet with him again would be no easy task. But as it turns out, that wasn't true. Joran was so desperate for money that Kelly was able to convince him to meet again by wiring a measly $100 deposit to him in advance. Bro, you'd be desperate for money. Under instruction from the FBI, Kelly then returned to Aruba for a second meeting with Joran on May the 10th, 2010. This time, he wore a wire and brought with him $10,000 of the promised $25,000. Wait. So he's bringing 10,000 of the promised 25 being of the promised 250. Okay. He had the remaining 15,000 sitting in an account on standby. This would be wired to Joran after Kelly received the information and was safely off the island. He also brought a contract with him for Joran to sign in order to make the extortion easier to prove in court. Joran, if you sign that, you're a dummy. Like, you're signing a contract that is like, yeah, here's my crimes. Don't sign contracts admitting to your crimes. Back inside an Aruban hotel room, Joran signed the contract and Kelly handed over the $10,000 as agreed. After this was done, the pair got into a car and drove to a house not far from the hotel. They parked on the street, and Joran informed Kelly that the house had been under construction at the time of Natalie's death. He stated that she was underneath the foundation and that his father had helped bury her. With this information, Joran signed agreement in hand. Kelly then returned to the United States and wired the remaining $15,000 to Joran's bank account. He was advised by the FBI to not file any type of lawsuit while Joran's latest claims were being investigated. Neither Kelly nor the FBI nor the Aruban government believed that this new story held any more water than the numerous ones that came before it, but they still wanted to do their due diligence. Their suspicions were confirmed when civil records showed that the home's construction had been completed months before Natalie's disappearance. Dude, you couldn't even find a house that was actually under construction? That's insane. The lazy work, Joran. That was enough to stop them from evicting the family and tearing their home down, and this turned out to be a wise decision. 1 week after receiving the $15,000, Joran emailed Kelly to inform him that he'd made everything up. Nobody knows why Joran did this. Oh, emailed him. Okay, yeah, I don't know. Nobody knows why he did it. Well, I'll tell you why he did it for the 25 grand. But why he told him that it wasn't true, I don't know. Either way, the FBI urged Kelly to keep holding off on any civil lawsuits as they worked with the Aruban government to iron out a criminal case against Joran. Why would there be a civil case? It's wire fraud. It's crime. While this was happening, Joran left Aruba for Peru, where he planned to use Beth's money to compete in the Latin American poker tour, which was scheduled for June the 2nd to the 5th. However, that would never happen because he would gamble the entire $25,000 sum away in less than 2 weeks. He'd also find himself behind bars once more, this time for the unrelated charge of murder. Bruh. You're an incompetent human being, in my opinion. Arrested again. On May the 14th, 2010, Joran entered Peru through Colombia and checked into the Hotel TAC in the Miraflores district of Lima, Peru. While staying there, he met a young woman named Stephanie Flores Ramirez, a third-year business student from the University of Lima and daughter of former Peruvian presidential candidate Ricardo Flores. Like Joran, Stephanie was also a poker player, although she had recently found much better luck than him by winning over $10,000 inside the hotel's casino. According to the hotel staff, she and Joran were seen playing poker together before Joran invited her back to his hotel room, where they planned to hang out and continue playing online poker on his laptop. Inside this hotel room is where Joran would permanently seal his fate by murdering Stephanie Flores on the 5-year anniversary of Natalee Holloway's death. Oh my fucking God, this came out of left field. He just straight up murdered someone else and it's provable. What the f***? Also, you murdered a former presidential candidate's daughter. He is gonna have some strings to pull, my dude, and you are gonna, it's Peru. I feel like they got that death penalty going on down there. While theories vary about exactly what happened inside the room, Joran stated that Stephanie was using his computer to play poker when he stepped down to get some air. While he was gone, a Facebook message arrived from a stranger who had been harassing him over Natalee Holloway's disappearance. He says that Stephanie saw the message and started snooping through his social media accounts. This is when she allegedly realized whose room she was staying in. When he returned, Joran said that Stephanie began attacking him, which prompted him to take her by the throat. In a taped confession, Joran said, "She was on the bed when I hit her hard with my right elbow, and I think her head went back and hit the wall. Then she begins to bleed. Immediately I get on top of her, and with both hands I begin to strangle her, keeping her that way for a minute. After that I throw her to the floor, but she keeps breathing. At that moment I take off my shirt and put it on her face, pressing on it. I don't remember for how long, but she stops breathing. In this way, I think I caused her death." Yeah, no shit, dude. What the fuck? After he was confident that she was dead, Joran considered what to do next. He said that he was high on marijuana at the time and couldn't think clearly, but he considered folding her body into a suitcase and dumping it in the ocean. When he realized this wouldn't work because the hotel would check his luggage as he left. Really? Okay, for some reason. He simply left her behind in the hotel room. If the hotel asked to look at my luggage, I'd be like, no, you can't. Thank you very much. Like TSA at the airport, yes. Random people in a hotel? No. Especially leaving. If you're going in some sketchy part of the world where they do the X-ray thing to make sure there's no bombs in there, I'd be like, yeah, okay. But leaving hotels, be like, bro, I'm leaving. He placed a do not disturb sign on the door's exterior as he exited. The hotel's maid discovered her 2 days later on June the 2nd. Joran had beaten her so severely that her neck had been broken. Upon leaving the hotel, Joran bought supplies to dye his hair red and then he fled to Chile. Right, dyeing your hair red. Subtle. Here he contacted an ex-girlfriend of his to request emergency money in order to return to Aruba. However, his life on the land was short-lived. Just 4 days after murdering Stephanie, he was arrested by Chilean authorities in a rented cab while on his way to Santiago. After being questioned and denying everything, insisting that Stephanie had been murdered by armed robbers, he was extradited back to Peru, where he gave a full confession, including the direct quote that I provided earlier. He was housed inside the Lima police headquarters and placed on suicide watch until he could face justice. The same day he was officially charged with Flores' murder, US authorities also filed charges against him for wire fraud in the United States. There we go. On Joran's first day in court in Peru, he had to be transported to the courthouse via an armored truck and ushered past a large crowd that jeered and threw rotten food at him. Inside, he was brought before a panel of 3 judges rather than a jury. None of his family were in attendance. Yeah, in Peru, maybe they just don't have juries. They're not as common as you think internationally. At first, Joran's counsel attempted to have the taped confession thrown out, saying that it had been coerced. They claimed that he had been on his way to Santiago to turn himself in, and that he was innocent of all charges. But this didn't work. They changed strategies, and opted instead to try for a reduced sentence based on sympathy. He murdered someone to the point of breaking their neck. Now they stated that he killed Stephanie on the anniversary of Natalee's death because of a severe emotional reaction to extreme psychological trauma. No excuse for murder. The prosecution rebutted this argument by arguing that psychological examinations concluded that Joran is a psychopathic person. The panel of judges did not grant Joran's request. On the 11th of January 2012, 25-year-old Joran van der Sloot entered a guilty plea for the murder of Stephanie Flores Ramirez and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He was also given a fine of $75,000 to be paid to the Flores family. When will he be out of prison? 2050. That's a good long time away. Wait, 2040? 2040. Still a good long time away. Hopefully he'll get even more when they get him for the other murder. The confession. With Joran now behind bars until his mid-50s and a trial pending in the United States that would likely see him imprisoned for the remainder of his miserable life, for wire fraud of 25 grand? He's going to get, until the end of his life, he's going to get 30, 40 years for that? Seems unlikely. It is America, though. You never know. They can be he committed several murders, but we'll give him 7 years. He got out on parole. And then someone else would be 100 years. What did he do? Stole a cup. America's weird. Beth Holloway was therefore more content than she'd been in years. However, she simply couldn't move on because she was still haunted by a desire to hear Joran own up to his actions. She also wanted to know what had become of Natalie's body so that her remains could be recovered and brought back to Alabama. Even though she knew it would not change anything, she needed closure. While Joran was awaiting trial for murder, Beth flew to Peru to meet with him inside the jailhouse for one last desperate attempt to make him talk. She brought a Dutch television crew along with her and sat down face to face with him. However, Joran did not wish to speak with her. The interview lasted less than 1 minute and concluded with him handing Beth his lawyer's business card before returning to his cell. Not long after this, once Joran was officially convicted in Peru, Dave Holloway had Natalie declared legally dead. Beth was not happy with this because she was not ready to close that particular door just yet, not until she had definitive answers. But answers would not come for another 11 years, until Joran was extradited to the United States to stand trial. Wait, why was he This doesn't make sense. He was extradited from Peru, where he's serving a 28-year sentence for murder, to the United States after 11 years, where he's for fraud? Isn't he going to go to a less intense prison then? Than the murder prison in Peru rather than fraud prison in America? Leave him in Peru to rot! During those 11 years, several notable events occurred. First, Beth became a motivational speaker and founded the International Safe Travels Foundation, a non-profit created to inform and educate the public on how to safely travel to foreign countries, advise on which countries to avoid, and more. She also worked with America's Most Wanted founder and host John Walsh to organize the Natalee Holloway Resource Center at the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C. The exhibit provided resources to families of missing persons. As for what Joran was doing during this time, he was being productive as well by sorting through all of his love letters. Oh, cringe. Yes, because he was young, relatively attractive, and had garnered international infamy, Hebristophiles began coming out of the woodwork in the hopes of starting a relationship with him. Prison guards reported that he had many potential suitors from dozens of faraway countries. However, his eye landed on one specific girl close to home. Her name was Lady Figueroa, a candy and cigarette vendor at the prison. The pair began meeting twice a week and eventually married in a prison ceremony in July of 2014. When Figueroa was 7 months pregnant with his child, he should be in prison! What's going on? Why is he allowed to do this in prison? Unsurprisingly, their marriage sparked the media's interest and dozens of articles were written, which is how we know exactly what was going through Figueroa's tiny mind. Through her tiny, tiny alleged brain. Quoting, "Many people judge Joran and criticize him, saying he's a monster and an assassin, but when you get to know him, you know he's different. I want to show he's not a monster. He's changed a lot. He's a gentle, sensitive, kind person, and I love him. I know he is killed, but he is now paying for what he did. He is asking God for forgiveness and praying every day." Oh my god. He's a psychopathic murderer, lady. What's wrong with you? The marriage lasted for 10 years until 2023 when Joran filed for divorce so that he could marry another girl, Eva Pacojuanaco, who Joran referred to as prettier and younger. Lady Figueroa was furious. Around this time, Joran was also staying busy by participating in the prison's illegal drug trade. He acted as a mule for cocaine, but was eventually caught and convicted for selling drugs in 2021. For this, he was given another 18 years. However, he'll not serve the full term, as Peruvian law states that prison stays cannot exceed 35 years if a person has not been sentenced to life. Unless Joran does something truly horrendous while behind bars, he'll be released from prison in Peru no later than 2045. And with that out of the way, that brings us to June of 2023, when Joran was temporarily extradited to the United States to stand trial in federal court for extortion. Here, he found that the FBI had done their homework and had him boxed in. He was facing up to life in prison, but they offered him a way out via a proffer agreement. Oh wait, I don't understand how he can be... I know... sorry, it's extortion, not fraud or whatever. It's a bad crime. Yes, it's not great. But life in prison? Okay. As I understand it, a proffer agreement is a written contract signed between a defendant and a federal prosecutor in which the defendant agrees to disclose all known useful information about a particular crime in exchange for total immunity from that specific crime. In these types of agreements, defendants are under extreme pressure to be truthful, as if the prosecutors can prove they lied about anything during their statement, the agreement is considered null, and the defendant can then be tried as normal with all the information they provided being used against them as if it were a regular confession. Oh my god, that is a risky business, dude. Because of the immunity aspect, these agreements are rare and usually only offered under very special circumstances. In Joran's case, it was done to provide closure for the Holloway family. Beth gave her blessing. As she understood it, it was very unlikely that Natalie's murder would ever be solved in the traditional sense of the word, and after 18 years of fighting, she simply wanted to have a confession on the record. Yeah, he's also got a massive prison sentence anyway. The offer given to Joran was 20 years for extortion, with the condition that he agreed to give a full confession about what happened to Natalie, and he accepted. But okay, 2045, 2065, he's in prison. He's going to die in prison at that rate. So, or he's going to be an old man when he's released. On October the 3rd, 2023, Beth and several other members of Natalie's family were brought to the Shelby County Jail and placed inside a viewing room. Across the hall, Joran was strapped into a polygraph and asked a series of very specific questions about Natalie's disappearance. Yeah, but also polygraphs are bullshit. Why are we still doing this? Knowing that he was completely safe from prosecution, Joran finally admitted that he killed Natalee Holloway on purpose. With no emotion in his voice, he said that after climbing into the Calpo brothers' car with Natalie on the night of May the 30th, 2005, they set off toward the Holiday Inn where Natalie's group was staying. She told them that she wanted to be dropped off right outside the front door, but Joran told the Calpos to stop the car a few blocks earlier so that he and Natalie could walk along the beach together the rest of the way. His plan, he said, was to get her alone and seduce her. While watching the waves, Joran said that they laid down together on the sand and he started to feel her up. She protested, but Joran continued. After this, there was a struggle, and she kneed him in the groin hard, and this enraged Joran. When she knees me in the crotch, I get up on the beach, and I kick her extremely hard in the face. She's laying down unconscious, possibly even dead, but definitely unconscious. After this, knowing that Beth was listening, he provides graphic details about how he ended Natalie's life using a cinder block he found lying nearby, before dragging her body out into the ocean. He then went home to bed, hoping that his actions that night would never be known. Neither Calpo brothers nor Paulus van der Sloot were involved. Some question how reliable this new version of events is, considering that Joran has given at least a dozen different recollections over the years, but Beth believes that she finally has the truth. If he lied, he's opened himself up to prosecution for a second murder charge. She doesn't believe that he would risk that. Well, he's not risking much because he's really in prison forever. Outside the jail that day, Beth addressed a crowd of her supporters. Today, I can tell you with certainty, after 18 years, that as far as I'm concerned, Natalie's case is solved. It is over. Joran van der Sloot is no longer the suspected killer in my daughter's murder. He is the killer. Days later, Joran was returned to Peru to serve the remainder of his sentence for murdering Stephanie Flores. Once his sentences have been served in both countries, he'll be eligible for parole no later than 2065. By then, he'll be 78 years old. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed it. It's a weird word to use. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please like, subscribe, make sure you leave a review on Spotify. Why not? And I'll see you next time.